Hello, and welcome back to Dream Phonograph, the quiet harbor where history drifts off to sleep. Tonight, we're setting a course for the salt-stained world of the Age of Exploration, a time when sailors were rocked in wooden cradles on the waves, trusting the stars far more than any map. If you find a bit of peace on these journeys with us, a quiet tap on the subscribe or like button is always welcome. Think of the notification bell as a ship's bell, gently marking the passage of time as you drift away. We've recorded this episode at a slow, steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of an old ship, to help guide your own thoughts toward rest. It's always a joy to see where you're listening from, so feel free to leave your city and the time in the comments. We love to imagine all your little lights glowing across the world's dark oceans. Now, before we cast off, let's get settled. Allow your shoulders to drop, soften your jaw, and just feel the day finally ebb away. Maybe dim the lamps or light a single candle, a small ritual to signal it's time for rest. Pull a blanket close and start to breathe with the rhythm of a gentle tide, letting each exhale become just a little longer, a little slower. Let the quiet hum of your room settle around you, like the sound of rigging in a calm wind. When you're ready, close your eyes, take one last deep breath in, and let it all go. We're setting sail into tonight's story, why it sucked to be a sailor in the Age of Exploration. Before the sun has even thought about rising, you're standing in the flickering dance of lantern light on the Rua Nova dos Mercadores. There's a taste of salt on your lips, a gift from the Tagus River as it breathes through the arches, carrying the iron tang of anchors and the sweet, heavy rot of spices unloaded in the dark. Your new boots, stiff and unapologetic, are planted on the same stones that have launched 1,000 mad dreams since Prince Henry's men first started chasing winds on parchment. You take a deep breath. It's a cocktail of smoke, bitter orange peel, and the low murmur of prayers slicing through the chill. A clerk from the Casa de India, looking like he's been awake for a week, waves you over. His quill hovers over a ledger, ready to swap your name for a spot on a ship and a wage you've got a 50-50 chance of ever collecting. You raise a hand and swear your life away to the captain, the crown, and whatever saint is in charge of not letting sailors drown. The oath tastes mostly of cheap, stale wine, because someone got a head start on the communion cups. The clerk drones through the articles. 2 cruzados for your mother now, 1.5 for you if you make it back, and a thrilling menu of hard biscuit, salt pork, and chickpeas. You listen to the rhythm of his voice, a kind of morbid lullaby where the tune matters more than the words. But when he gets to the part about prize shares 1/50th of anything you steal for the common sailors, the room suddenly gets very quiet. You can almost feel the ghostly pulse of every signature before yours, a whole brotherhood of men from Porto to Brabant, all making the same desperate bet. Behind you, the harbor is waking up. Fisherwomen pull their shawls tight against the wind. An old woman shoves a sprig of rosemary into your palm, a little piece of land to carry with you. Kids, laughing in that way that makes your chest ache, chase gulls between coils of rope. You look out at your ship, the Times São Jerónimo asterisk, riding the tide. Her hull is freshly tarred, black and serious. She's big enough to throw a shadow over the whole quay, but against the endless sky, she looks terrifyingly small. You remember the stories of Magellan's fleet, how only one ship crawled home, and you find yourself wondering which plank of wood holds the secret between fortune and an unmarked grave. The boatswain, his voice muffled by the fog, starts the roll call. One by one, men from Azores farms, Flemish gunners, and a Moorish interpreter answer, each judged not by his size, but by the steadiness of his breath. When your name rings out, you step forward. The boatswain clocks the scar on your wrist, notes that you can read, and gives a curt nod. The purser hands you a small bag, some linen, a few wax tablets for letters you might never send, and a wooden rosary, the beads already worn smooth by the thumbs of worried men. You tuck the rosemary in beside it, figuring a little help from both land and heaven couldn't hurt. An older salt, Duarte from Madeira, leans in to share the kind of wisdom that doesn't make it into the official contracts. Sleep near the mainmast, he whispers. The sway is gentlest there. Stuff a vinegar-soaked rag in your water cake to keep the taste of rot out. And always asterisk, trade your spare needle for a lemon. Remember the navigation charts, he says, his breath smelling of anise and patience, but remember how to laugh even more. We carry stories. It's how we prove to the sea we're worth more than just timber and meat. Soon enough, you're stepping onto the gangplank. It rises and falls with the tide, and you match its rhythm, leaving the solid stone of the city for the living wood of the ship. The deck flexes beneath your feet. The captain stands near the quarterdeck, his eyes sharp but not cruel. He meets each sailor's gaze and says the same two words: you are counted. When he says them to you, they land deep in your chest, not just a name in a ledger, but a part of the whole. Counted. You find your spot in the forecastle, wedging your hammock between two beams where a sliver of light cuts through a gun port. It smells of pine tar, damp wool, and the faint green scent of the rosemary you've tucked just above your head. As the sun climbs, a final quiet falls over the harbor. This is it. You stand at the bow, looking at the line where the river meets the horizon, and you feel the true weight of your signature on that contract. Hunger, filth, back-breaking work, and the very real chance of never seeing home again. It's a heavy cloak, but it's lined with something else, too, the wild, terrifying promise of a world bigger than any you've ever known. One last trip ashore to say goodbye. You press your wage tokens into your brother's hand and touch your forehead to his. There are no words left. You turn and walk back to the ship before he can see your face, wanting him to remember you as you are in this moment, upright, purposeful, already belonging more to the tide than to the land. That night, the crew gathers around a single lantern for a supper of biscuit dipped in broth. Someone starts to sing a shanty, his voice a low whisper that winds around the mast. You close your eyes, letting the shared melody convince you that even fear feels lighter when it's not carried alone. The captain's log lies open nearby, the last entry stark and simple, *omnia parata*. All is ready, and you finally understand that readiness isn't about being certain. It's about being willing to take a deep breath and sail straight into the heart of uncertainty. Before sleep, you climb to the forecastle one last time. The stars are a brilliant, chaotic scatter overhead. The ship's bell rings out, followed by a collective exhale from every man on board. Tomorrow, the anchors will rise and the sea will take you. But tonight, you just lie in your hammock, swaying in the dark, the scent of rosemary in the air, listening to the waves practice the first lullaby of a very long voyage. Dawn, in its infinite mercy, washes the quay in a flat pewter light. I wake up to the sound of the São Jerónimo groaning as it shifts with the tide. A noise I'm learning is less imminent shipwreck and more ship stretching after a long nap. The decks are slick with dew, so I go barefoot, the grain of the planks a welcome non-slip texture under my feet. Bells from shore chapels call out, and our ship's bell answers right back, a little dialogue between land and sea happening right over my head. I can taste the salt in the air, a gritty preview of the months to come. Today's the day the river finally lets us go, and every movement on board is slow, deliberate, as if we're all trying to savor the last few gulps of harbor air before the ocean replaces it with its own harsher, saltier brand. The boatswain, a man whose beard seems to hold its own weather system, hands me what is essentially a rock, a holystone, he calls it. With the rest of the deck gang, I start scrubbing the planks in circles, a mind-numbing morning ritual that leaves faint, sun-catching halos on the wood. Buckets of water slosh against my legs, and the rhythm of scrub, rinse, scrape becomes a sort of wordless prayer. A few of the old-timers hum a psalm, their strokes in perfect, deck-drying sync. The quartermaster explains it's to keep splinters from turning nasty in our feet and to make spilled gunpowder easy to spot. So, fewer infections and less chance of us all going up in a flash. Comforting. Lessons here come wrapped in chores, and I find a strange peace in how the stone grinds away my anxiety just like it smooths the pine. Once the deck is gleaming, we move on to unfurling the main course, a sail that smells of old wax and faraway rain. My fingers, clumsy and slow, fumble with the reef points while seasoned hands move with a fluid grace. When the wind finally catches the canvas, it blossoms open like a time-lapse sunrise. Lines creak, and the tar I get on my knuckles is clearly here to stay. The mate murmurs about northeasterlies and currents near Cascais, a string of words that sound like a secret language for predicting the weather's mood. I just nod, trying to absorb it all like lyrics to a very long, very repetitive sea shanty I'll be singing for months. Before noon, the chaplain gathers everyone. A portable altar is lashed to the capstan, and a little painted statue of Our Lady of Good Voyage is tied to the mizzenmast, looking remarkably calm about the whole situation. Candles flicker, and when the holy water hits my brow, it's a strange mix of salt and sanctity. The chaplain's voice is a low hum, naming saints of sailors and ports I've never heard of. For a moment, with all of us standing barefoot and braced, the ship does feel like a floating chapel, albeit a very creaky one. Then the pilot arrives, wearing a scarlet sash that screams, "I know what I'm doing, so don't touch anything." He checks his charts, glances at the sky, and pats the ship's rail like an old friend. At his signal, the order to weigh anchor ripples down the line in hushed tones. Drummers start a slow, steady beat for the capstan, and I throw my weight against one of the bars. My chest meets the wood with a grunt each time I lean, my heart and the drumbeat becoming one rather painful rhythm. The anchor chain rattles up, and the anchor itself emerges from the depths, dripping with dark, fragrant river mud. Some sailors touch it for luck. I decide to keep my hands clean just in case luck is also sticky. As the anchor breaks the surface, trumpets sound from the quay. A final flourish. Families wave handkerchiefs, and I spot my brother, a tiny figure on the edge of the warehouses. I raise a hand. There are no dramatic movie-style goodbyes shouted across the water, just the awkward silence of distance. I just try to memorize the line of his shoulders, storing the image away next to the sprig of rosemary tucked in my pocket. The São Jerónimo glides toward the sea, pulled by the tide like a gentle, insistent hand. The pilot calls out depth soundings, the lead line whistling before it thuds into the water. By the mark 10, the leadsman sings out, and I find myself repeating it softly, the numbers a strangely calming chant. Gulls cry overhead as orders fly, hands to braces, sheet home the topsail. All delivered in a tone that's barely above a conversation. Less shouting, more doing, which I can get behind. As the river widens, the wind picks up, the sails belly out, and the ropes pull taut, thrumming like giant guitar strings. I brace my feet and haul, muscles waking up. The whole world tilts as the ship heels over, and I watch the crew lean as one, a silent dance of balance I haven't learned the steps to yet. The air changes too. The smell of river mud gives way to the sharp, clean scent of the open sea iodine, kelp, and a whole lot of nothing. By afternoon, the city is just a watercolor smear on the horizon. The captain orders the royal standard raised, its crimson catching the sun. He points to a whole lot of blue on the sea chart, promising there are things like sandbars under it. I'll take his word for it. He maps out our journey north for the trade winds, a tack to clear Africa, a stop for water. His voice is a low, rhythmic guide, making the vast unknown feel slightly less terrifying. Our first meal at sea is salted cod that's been convinced to be soft again, some sweet onions, and a hunk of bread. We eat sitting on the deck, swapping tales that feel bigger than the ship itself. A gunner describes the time blue fire danced on the masthead. A topman remembers dolphins racing the bow, their backs like polished silver. The stories settle over me like a warm blanket, a layer of wonder on top of the jitters. Evening brings us to the mouth of the Tagus, where the river officially hands us over to the Atlantic. The gentle rock becomes a proper sway, the motion now undeniable. I grip the rail, bending my knees with each rise and fall. the pilot gives the captain a final salute and climbs into a small boat to take him back to a life with solid ground. A silence falls over the crew. And just like that, the training wheels are off. From here on out, it's just us, the captain, and the sea. Night descends, soft and absolute. I take the first watch on the forecastle. The wind is cool and tastes of salt, and the only light comes from a few hooded lanterns. I keep a hand on the shrouds, feeling the ship's vibrations. The helmsman hums a quiet tune from the Azores. One by one, the stars pop out in the inky blackness. The navigator shows me how to find my way by starlight, and for the first time, the endless dark feels less like a threat and more like a map. Busy hands, I learn, keep the mind from inventing sea monsters. At midnight, the watch changes. I head below deck, where hammocks sway in a gentle, ghostly unison. I slip into mine, a fabric cocoon that cradles me. The scent of my rosemary sprig mixes with the ship's smells of tar and wool. Above, I hear the soft footsteps of the new watch. The waves murmur against the hull, a sound both distant and intimate. I whisper a promise into the dark, not to the ship or the sea, but mostly to myself, to see this through. The promise feels like a second blanket as I drift off, rocked to sleep by the very same ocean that just this morning I was absolutely terrified of. Your new career as a sailor apparently begins in the dead of night. The day kicks off not with a sunrise, but with 4 sharp bells and a prodding from the night watch that's less of a gentle rousing and more of a "get up or I'll tip you out." You tumble out of your hammock, your feet finding the ladder rungs through muscle memory because it's still pitch black, and stumble up to the deck. The air is cold enough to see your breath, which happily mingles with the smells of damp rope and what you hope is just wood smoke from the galley. The ship, the time São Jerónimo *, has a long, lazy rock to it, and you learn quickly to time your steps so it feels less like a threat and more like a drunken dance partner. Routine, you figure, is the only thing that'll keep you sane, so you let it wrap around you like a scratchy wool blanket. And what a routine it is. First up, holy stoning. Again, yes, you did this yesterday, but the deck, it seems, has a short-term memory. You and the others get on your knees, and the circular scrubbing across the planks sounds like a collective, weary whisper. One guy starts humming a lullaby from his hometown, another layers a gloomy Flemish hymn on top, and the resulting mashup is something. Still, the rhythm is weirdly soothing and the work warms your shoulders. When the sun finally decides to show up, painting the deck a pale gold, the boatswain grunts in approval. Progress. Now get a bucket and rinse all that gunk into the scuppers. As he says, with the air of a man revealing a great secret, repetition is how a ship stays alive. You're pretty sure it's also how sailors get bad backs. All that scrubbing works up an appetite, which is unfortunate, because next is breakfast. The purser, a man who guards the bread room like it's the national treasury, unlocks it with a dramatic turn of a key. The crew lines up, wooden bowls in hand. You get 2 wedges of hard biscuit, which clatter onto the oak cask lid before being softened in warm water to a texture resembling soggy cardboard. The purser checks every name off a list, making sure the voyage's longevity is secured one stale crust at a time. But wait, what's this? Dried figs, a genuine surprise meant to lift spirits. You chew yours slowly, savoring the sweetness and trying to ignore the gritty texture that comes from the weevils who got to the flour first. Someone down the line cracks a joke about the weevils being extra protein, and a tired laugh ripples through the men. It's not much, but it's something. After your gourmet meal, you're off to the master gunner for a lesson in things that go boom. He calmly walks you and 3 other greenhorns around the giant demi-culverins, explaining how to swab, load, and run them out without, blowing everyone to kingdom come. His voice is so drowsy, you could almost fall asleep, except he's detailing all the ways you could lose a limb. Keep the worm damp to avoid sparks, he murmurs. Stand clear of the recoil, tamp the powder steadily. He insists that boring, disciplined drills mean fewer nasty surprises when the time comes to make some real thunder. You practice until your muscles and breath are in sync, then polish the cannon's bronze with an oily cloth until it gleams. Mid-morning brings the day's main event, the rationing of fresh water. The barrels are treated with more reverence than a holy relic, and the master-at-arms measures out each portion with a pewter pint cup to prevent a riot. You tilt the tin cup to your lips, letting the water wash over your tongue. It tastes faintly of oak and profoundly of luxury. A single drop spills onto your wrist, and it feels as cool and precious as a blessing. You know it won't always taste this good, so you try to memorize the sensation for the hot, thirsty nights to come. Then it's time for school. On the quarterdeck, the pilot unfurls the traverse board, a glorified pegboard that tracks the ship's course. He explains how to read the zigzagging path of pegs as if it's a perfectly normal thing to do. He then hands you a knotted rope, the log line, and shows you how to chuck it off the back of the ship to measure speed. You count the knots that unspool before a tiny hourglass runs out, then call the number to a scribe. It's a strange sort of magic, turning this vast, terrifying ocean into a set of numbers you can write down, a way to pretend you're in control. At midday, the cook serves up a stew of peas and salt pork. The pork bits float near the surface, their fat shimmering like tiny, greasy life rafts. You find a spot in the shade of the mainmast and listen to the crew. It's like a seminar for tired, salty scholars. One guy's reciting Pliny on dolphins, another's quoting a prayer from Erasmus, and a third is muttering about the winds off Cape Verde. You figure they'll talk about anything to avoid talking about what's in the stew. When the sun is at its highest and hottest, you retreat to a shady spot to practice tying knots with Duarte, the old salt who took you under his wing. With a coil of rope and hands that move with hypnotic grace, he shows you a carrick bend, a bowline, a clove hitch. Speed comes later, he rumbles, but grace comes now. You fumble with the rope, your fingers feeling like clumsy sausages, but you keep at it, tying and untying until the motions start to feel natural, like the rope itself is teaching you. Just when you think you might get a moment's peace, a cry goes up, all hands to sail trim. The wind has shifted. You scramble to the braces, your bare feet finding purchase on the warm deck, and haul on the ropes alongside your shipmates, everyone's grunts and breaths falling into a rhythm. The great sails billow out, catching the trade wind that's pushing you south. It's hard work, but there's a thrill to it. Afterward, you follow the mate as he inspects the rigging, pointing out frayed lines that need mending before they snap. Preventive care, you learn, is just another way of singing the ship a lullaby. Later, the surgeon gives a cheerful lecture on scurvy. Down in his cramped quarters, he holds up dried citrus peel and sauerkraut as if they're crown jewels, explaining in a gentle, almost bedtime story voice how the disease makes your gums bleed and old scars reopen. The delivery is soft, but the message is terrifying. You find yourself volunteering to tend a tiny garden box near the galley, a pathetic little patch of hope where mustard greens might sprout. As evening falls, the whole crew gathers to hear the captain read from his log. He recounts the day's mileage, the wind's direction, and any sightings, flying fish, porpoises, another ship in the distance. It's the world's most boring bedtime story, a lullaby of numbers and compass points that is somehow deeply reassuring. He then asks for petitions, and one by one, men step forward with small requests, their concerns heard and acknowledged. It's a quiet reminder that order is kept here by attention, not by fear. Finally, it's time for your first full night watch. You're on the second dog watch, which means you get to see the twilight melt away. As the bell strikes 7, you take your post at the forecastle rail. The sea glows with a faint, otherworldly phosphorescence, and flying fish shoot out of the water like sparks. Above, the stars are impossibly bright, and the navigator points out Canopus, a sign you're heading ever southward. Another sailor, Marau, joins you in the quiet, pulling out a small psaltery and plucking a melody so soft it's almost lost in the wind. He tells you about his wife's weaving, and you both count the bell strikes that mark the passing half hours. When your watch is over, you creep back down the ladder, careful not to wake the hammock swaying in the dark. You crawl into your own, the wool blanket a welcome comfort. Before you let sleep take you, you run through the day. The scrubbing, the gun drills, the water ration, the knots, the stargazing. Each task is a bead on a rosary of exhaustion, a testament to a day survived. The sea outside is endless and doesn't care one bit about you, but in here, tucked within the wooden ribs of the Times São Jerónimo asterisk, there is order, there is a rhythm, and you let that hum carry you off to sleep. Weeks of glorious, mind-numbing routine on the open sea have a way of making you forget what's coming. Then the ship's log starts marking latitudes that make the old salts go quiet. We were approaching the Cape of Good Hope, or as we privately called it, the Cape of Are We There Yet? This is where the Atlantic and Indian Oceans have a full-blown domestic dispute, and we were about to sail right through the middle of it. The air bit with a new cold, and the sea began to take these long, deep breaths, swelling under us like a restless giant. The sky filled with wispy mare's tails clouds, a pretty, postcard-like warning that all hell was about to break loose. Even the saltiest veterans started double-checking the straps on their chests. You could feel the tension humming through the rigging. Our dawn chorus wasn't birdsong, it was the sound of hammers. The carpenter was deep in the hull, tapping for any seam that looked like it might give up the ghost when the ship started getting body slammed. I was roped into helping him, pounding oakum into cracks and slathering on pitch. The smell of tar stuck to you like a bad reputation. On deck, sailmakers were adding extra stitches to the sails, each one feeling less like a repair and more like a prayer. The bosun, a man who believed in belts, times and times suspenders, had us rigging extra stays and braces. We worked in a silence so thick you could caulk a seam with it, not out of fear, but because we were all too busy focusing on not dying. By noon, the horizon looked like it had picked a fight with a bigger horizon and lost. A massive, bruise-colored cloud bank rolled in, swallowing the sun and turning the sea to polished slate. The wind started whipping across the deck, playing tunes on the rigging and giving everyone a free salt spray facial. The captain bellowed the order for double-reefed topsails, and up I went with the topmen. My fingers quickly turned into clumsy sausages in the cold, but you learn to tie knots with a care that borders on religious. Down below, the cook was tying down his pots with the grim determination of a man who refuses to lose his soup to the sea. We were all rehearsing for the storm's big dance number, a choreography passed down through generations of sailors. When it hit, it wasn't a single knockout punch, but a flurry of accelerating jabs. The rain came in sideways, cold enough to steal the breath from your lungs. A brutal gust slammed into our port side, and the Times São Jerónimo Times didn't just lean, it groaned and threw itself over. We all instinctively bent our knees and clung to whatever was bolted down. The waves weren't waves anymore. They were moving cliffs of dark water, their tops ripped to shreds by the wind. Every time the bow plunged into a trough, the sea hammered against the deck, looking for any excuse to come inside. Then, as if the storm wasn't putting on enough of a show, we got Street Elmo's fire. Ghostly blue flames danced on the mastheads, a phenomenon the old-timers said was a sign from the saints. I wasn't sure if the saints were with us or just enjoying the spectacle, but it was a weirdly beautiful light show in the middle of a divine temper tantrum. Near the main hatch, the chaplain, soaked to the bone but steady as a rock, was reciting a litany. His voice was no louder than a murmur, but in the heart of the chaos, it was a thread of calm we all clung to. Hours dissolved into a blur of shouted orders and desperate action. My turn at the pumps came soon enough. It's a miserable, back-breaking rhythm, up, down, but there's a strange comfort in it. You're too busy physically fighting the ocean to be mentally scared of it. With every stroke that sent a gush of pitch-tinged water back where it belonged, I felt like I was bailing out a little bit of the fear, too. A trip below deck was like entering another world. Hammocks swung so violently, men had to lash themselves in. The air was a thick cocktail of wet wool, tar, and the sour funk of a vinegar cask that had given up. In the swaying lantern light, faces were grim but composed. Down here, calm wasn't a feeling, it was a job. Back on deck, a rogue wave decided to redecorate, sweeping across the waist and nearly taking 2 lads with it. Pure instinct took over. I grabbed a loose line, flung it, and they caught it. A bit of desperate rope flinging and some undignified hauling later, they were back on their feet, sputtering and laughing. Hysterical, exhausted laughter, the best kind. Night fell, but without any stars, it was just a deeper shade of black. Telling time with a sandglass in a hurricane is a special kind of madness, but it was my turn to guard it from the spray. The mate came around with warmed, honeyed wine. It tasted like heaven's fire going down, a little bit of warmth to fight off the all-consuming cold. Sometime after midnight, we met the Times wave, the one the other waves tell stories about. The São Jerónimo Times clawed its way up the face of this liquid monster, hung there for a heart-stopping eternity, and then slid down the other side with a lurch that rearranged my internal organs. Just then, a top-gallant yard cracked overhead with the sound of a giant snapping a bone. "Repair crew," the bosun yelled, and naturally, I volunteered. Climbing the rigging in that mess wasn't bravery, it was pure adrenaline-fueled stupidity. Up there, it was just you, the wind, the dark, and a profound sense of I should have learned a nice, safe trade, like baking. We lashed a replacement spar by feel, trusting each other completely. When I finally got back down, legs shaking, the bosun clapped me on the shoulder. That simple gesture steadied me more than any rope. Toward dawn, the storm didn't so much end as get bored and wander off. The rain softened to a mist, and a pale smear of light appeared in the east, and then the sun. I've never been so happy to see that big glowing rock in my life. The ship, once a chaotic battleground, slowly turned back into a workplace. And the cook, a true wizard, produced hot barley porridge with molasses. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I probably would have married that bowl of porridge. Later, hearing the captain read the log was surreal. He turned our near-death experience into a neat, tidy entry of coordinates and damages. It was oddly comforting, like putting a monster in a little box. He noted the street Elmo's fire, calling it an auspicious sign. Our chaos had become a story. That evening, the sea was a gentle, rolling swell. I stood at the rail, staring up at the Southern Cross, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. But there was a quiet hum of satisfaction, too. We'd met the worst the world could throw at us, and were still here to complain about it. The storm was gone, but the real anchor, I realized, was the man next to you. And the knowledge that no matter how loud the wind howls, it can't drown out a quiet promise to see each other through to the morning. Days after the storm, a thick calm has settled over the deck, but it's a nervous quiet. There's a tension coiling beneath it, the kind that reminds you discipline has to be held as taut as the rigging. The captain announces a reading of the articles at morning muster, and we all shuffle into place. The parchment he unrolls is stained with salt at the edges, the tidy script listing every way a man can ruin himself at sea. Desertion, stealing biscuits, striking an officer, even cracking a bad joke about the king. Every sin has its price, measured in lashes or short rations. The captain's voice never rises above the whisper of wind in the sails, but each word lands like a lead weight. Hearing the law spelled out like that is like listening to the ship's heartbeat, steady, inescapable, and the only thing keeping us all alive. After the reading, the master-at-arms begins his rounds, inspecting lockers and hammocks for hidden dice or a sly flask of wine. I help him, lifting sea chests gently, because I know that a bundle of laundry or a letter from home is another man's last piece of sanity. The confiscated contraband, a few carved bone trinkets and a small stash of wine, ends up on a table by the mainmast. The captain doesn't yell. He just logs the items and assigns their owners to a few miserable shifts in the bilge. It's a quiet, routine reminder that order on this ship isn't a shout. It's a steady, relentless hum. But not every problem can be solved with extra chores. Midweek, a fight breaks out between a young sailor and the purser over the weight of the rations. The voices stay low, but the kid refuses an order, and that's a line you don't cross. The captain calls a hearing on the quarterdeck, inviting witnesses. We all stand there, hats in hand, a strange formality settling over us even in the middle of a dispute. The sailor admits he raised his hand but swears the hunger made him stupid. The captain listens, his eyes soft but unyielding, and sentences him to 5 lashes. It's a sharp, painful lesson, but a world away from the brutality the articles allow. It's mercy with a sting in its tail. When the time comes, we form a semicircle on deck. The boatswain fetches the cat o' nine tails, its leather thongs knotted to bite, not maim. The chaplain says a quick prayer about harmony, and then the sailor, stripped to the waist, grips the grating. I'm close enough to hear his breath, slow and deliberate, matching the beat of the drum that will count out the strokes. Each lash lands with a sharp hiss. He grunts through clenched teeth but makes no other sound. Afterwards, the surgeon dabs the welts with vinegar and salve, and his mates help him to his hammock. Discipline leaves a mark, but a rough sort of tenderness follows, as if the ship itself refuses to let the bitterness linger. Later, I share the afternoon watch with him. He's leaning against the rail, back bandaged, staring at the horizon. He's not angry. He talks about the gnawing in his belly, the shame of it all. I just listen for a while, then quietly remind him we all carry a bruise or two. We end up checking the ration ledger together, and the simple, solid act of counting the numbers seems to make the air easier to breathe. It hits me then. Being held accountable isn't so terrifying when the whole crew is holding it with you. At sunset, the purser calls me into the great cabin. He shows me the muster book, his finger tracing the list of names, noting who got punished, who earned a good word, who needs a bit of pay sent home to their family. The quill scratches, smelling faintly of iron, and watching him feels like seeing justice woven into fabric firm, but with a bit of give. He explains that every note he makes ensures a wife or mother ashore isn't left destitute. In his hands, all this paperwork becomes a kind of lullaby, keeping households half a world away from falling into chaos. Discipline here is more than just punishment. It's a ritual. Every Thursday we drill for emergencies. Fire buckets fly from hand to hand. We practice with pikes and small arms. Our movements are quiet, practiced, almost like a dance. When the captain dismisses us, his well done is barely a whisper, but it warms you more than a bellowed compliment ever could. At night, when the lanterns are low, the ghost stories come out, but they're not about ghosts, they're about other ships. Duarte tells of a Dutch convoy where a mutineer was left tied to the mast overnight, and someone else mentions a Spanish captain who'd have a man killed for blasphemy. The stories drift through the hammocks like distant thunder, reminders of how thin the line is between order and cruelty. They're the ballast that keeps us grateful for the measured hand on our own ship's tiller. To balance it all, the chaplain holds quiet confession circles. We sit on coiled rope near the galley, lantern light pooling in our laps, and men speak of impatience or envy. The chaplain's penances are gentle threads meant to weave us back together. Tell a story to a homesick lad, volunteer for an extra lookout, write that letter you've been putting off. My penance is to teach the younger boys a new knot each evening. It feels more like a gift than a punishment. Then one Sunday the captain does something I've never seen. He stands before us and tells a story about a mistake he made years ago, how he nearly ran the ship aground by ignoring his pilot. He talks about how the shame was heavier than any lash. In the quiet that follows, you can feel the fear on the ship dissolve just a little. If the man in charge can admit he was wrong, then maybe discipline isn't about power. Maybe it's just what happens when we forget how to trust each other. After evening mess, we find another kind of order in writing letters home. A few of us sit with wax tablets and charcoal, trying to explain this life to people who will never see it. I write about the articles and the drills, about the captain's fairness, trying to show my family that the rules are here to bring me home, not to break me. Each careful letter I scratch into the wax feels like a promise. As we cross the Tropic of Capricorn, discipline even finds its way into celebration. The King Neptune ceremony for sailors crossing the line for the first time is playful, but it still has rules. The novices kneel, get a smear of tar on the cheek, and are baptized with a bucket of seawater. There's laughter, but no one hits too hard or jeers too loud. It's a ritual of belonging. I kneel, feel the cool splash on my face, and the memory of the lash seems to wash away with it, replaced by the warmth of acceptance. That night I scratch a few words onto my own tablet. Law holds us, I write, but kindness stitches the seams. I tuck it away, and in the dark touch the sprig of rosemary from home, still fragrant after all these months. The drumbeat of punishment fades, replaced by the gentle rolling rhythm of the ship at rest, and I fall asleep thinking that discipline, when it's done right, doesn't feel like a fist. It feels like a steadying hand. The weeks have a way of blurring together out here, measured not in days but in the agonizingly slow crawl across the map. Eventually you stop worrying about the storms and start worrying about a much quieter threat, the bottom of the barrels. The purser's chalk marks next to each cask are looking suspiciously anorexic, and the cook started watering down the broth so much it's basically just hot water with an attitude. Breakfast is a rock-hard biscuit, softened not by choice but by sheer necessity. You have to dunk it twice in your cup just to make it pretend to be food, chewing slowly and listening to the galley cauldron creak as if it might whisper a recipe for making food out of thin air. Hunger, you learn, is a patient beast. It starts as a subtle rumble and grows into a constant, nagging companion. By noon, the sun has decided to personally cook you. Salt crusts on your skin and sweat evaporates before it can do you any good. The water ration gets slashed, and you cradle your little tin mug like it's the Holy Grail, making each sip last. Next to you, a shipmate closes his eyes, lost in a vision. "Oranges," he murmurs. The word alone sounds impossibly luxurious. Salt pork now only makes a guest appearance twice a week, replaced by a depressing pea mash and whatever beans the weevils didn't fancy. To lift our spirits, the cook roasts a handful of chickpeas with pepper. The smell is fantastic for about 30 seconds. Then your gums start to swell. You first notice it while cleaning your teeth with a twig. It comes away pink, a bad sign. Soon the men are comparing ailments in hushed tones, aching knees, old scars that feel fresh again, a bone-deep weariness that no amount of sleep can fix. The surgeon makes his rounds, poking at jawlines and peering at tongues. He throws everything but the galley sink at the problem: spruce beer, spoonfuls of sauerkraut, vinegar mouthwash. You volunteer to help him stir his strange-smelling potions of pine and citrus peel. The main ingredient, you suspect, is faint hope. To keep us from going completely mad, the bosun comes up with a new game for meal times. Remember real food. Each day, someone tells a story. A Portuguese sailor describes his mother's caldo verde. A deckhand from Guinea recalls rice steamed in banana leaves, and a gunner from Brittany talks of crispy buckwheat crepes. The stories are so good you can almost taste them. You add your own tale of fresh bread from a Lisbon market, still warm and smelling of rosemary. For a minute, just talking about it makes the gnawing in your gut a little quieter. Then comes the day of the legendary emergency citrus. The purser unlocks a sealed barrel, and inside are shriveled, pathetic-looking fruits. They look like sad, wrinkly little planets, but oh, the power they hold. We each get one wedge. The sour juice stings the cracks at the corners of your mouth and brings tears to your eyes, but nobody cares. We eat them slowly with the reverence of a religious ceremony, followed by a collective blissful sigh. Hope, it turns out, tastes like a punch in the mouth. It's not enough for everyone. A sailor named Mateo gets it bad. The surgeon puts him on a care roster, and when it's your turn, you read to him from a tattered book about other voyages, trying to distract him while you massage his legs to keep the blood moving. You fetch mustard greens from the planter box, wash them with our precious fresh water, and feed him the leaves one by one. He gives you a weak smile, whispering his thanks as if you'd just handed him a bar of gold. The rest of the food is going south. The flour has extra protein. The cook spends his days sifting out the wiggling bits. The biscuits are now baked twice, turning them into potential cannonballs. You learn a trick to soak them in seawater before a quick freshwater rinse, just to make them chewable. Your senses get sharper too. You can tell what herbs the cook is using just by the smell, a small comfort in a world of blandness. The captain's latest idea is Silent Tuesdays. No talking from dawn till dusk. It sounds like a punishment, but it's surprisingly peaceful. The ship's groans and your stomach's grumbles find a nice rhythm together. You focus on coiling ropes, polishing brass, mending sails. Hunger is just another sound, one you can acknowledge without letting it take over. At dusk, the chaplain holds a feast of scents. He hangs bundles of dried lavender, rosemary, and orange peel by the galley, and we all just stand there, sniffing like bloodhounds. You close your eyes and let the smells take you to gardens and markets far away. You'd be surprised how filling a good whiff of rosemary can be. The surgeon even has us doing what can only be described as geriatric yoga around the mainmast. You creak more than the ship does, but hey, at least you're moving. Every now and then, the ocean throws us a pity party in the form of a fish. When a big dorado hits a line, a cheer ripples through the ship. The cook treats the fish like a sacred object, searing thin slices that we all share. You savor every last crumb. In the season of hunger, waste is a word you forget. You still write letters, though your hand is weak. You don't write about the hunger directly, but you slip in a clue. We dream of oranges. Putting it on the page seems to lighten the load just a little. Afterward, you help Mateo to his hammock, feeling how terrifyingly light he's become. And then a miracle. Not land, but the next best thing, rain. It pours from the sky. The captain orders sailcloth rigged up to catch it. You stand under a sheet, letting the cool water drum on your shoulders, watching the barrels fill. Some men just tilt their faces to the sky, mouths open like kids tasting their first snow. You drink and drink, the water so sweet and clean it washes the staleness from your soul. For a moment, hunger loosens its grip. That night, the captain reads from the ship's log, his voice calm and steady. He lists the ration cuts, the citrus we shared, the fish we caught, and the rain we gathered. He doesn't need to shout to be heard. We endure, he says, by sharing what remains. The words settle over you like a warm blanket. The hunger is still there, but so is the friendship, the cleverness, and the quiet belief that land and fresh bread is waiting. You curl up in your hammock, stomach empty but spirit a little fuller, and fall asleep to the creak of the rigging, which sounds, for the first time in a long time, like a lullaby. The thing about the doldrums is they don't arrive with a crash of thunder, they just happen. One morning you wake up and the wind has clocked out. The sails, once pregnant with purpose, hang like damp laundry. The ocean irons itself flat, becoming a vast, sweaty mirror that throws the sun's glare right back in your face. The São Jerónimo just sits there, a toy boat in a bathtub. Even the gulls, those ever-present complainers, have vanished. In the dead air, sound gets weirdly loud. Every creak of the hull, every muttered word, every bare foot on the deck echoes like a confession in a cathedral. Time melts. The days smear into one long, sticky afternoon. There are no changing winds to mark the changing of the watch. The compass needle naps. The sun beats down until the deck planks are hot enough to cook on, forcing you to wrap your feet in rags to get around. Water is rationed with a miser's care, and every drop you sweat reappears instantly as a fine crust of salt on your skin. The whole crew moves in a kind of waking slumber. Coil a rope, pause. Check a knot, pause. Even the captain parcels out his words, as if afraid he'll use up the world's last bit of air. Our navigator, bless his ever-charting heart, sees this as a teachable moment. With nowhere to go, he turns the sweltering deck into a classroom. He'll gather us under an awning and get deep into the weeds of celestial navigation. You find yourself squinting through a cross staff, trying to make the sun kiss the horizon just so, then mumbling the angle like an incantation. It's either learn about declination tables or start having a serious conversation with a barnacle, so you learn. The lessons become a strange sort of lullaby, giving a shape to days that would otherwise dissolve into nothing. After a few days of this, the world starts to melt at the edges. The heat cooks up mirages off the bow, shimmering coastlines with impossible towers and palm trees. Squint long enough, and you'll swear you can smell damp earth and hear church bells. You have to keep reminding yourself it's all a trick of the light. To fight the phantoms, the chaplain invents a kind of group therapy. Each evening, one sailor describes a port from memory in painstaking detail. The rest of us close our eyes and go there with him. When it's your turn, you talk about the Tagus River, the terracotta roofs of home, the old woman selling rosemary under the arches. It's amazing how a real memory can keep the fake ones at bay. The nights are the only saving grace. With no wind to stir the surface, the sea becomes a perfect mirror for the sky. Stars burn so fiercely, you feel like you're floating in a bottle of ink filled with diamonds. The navigator points out constellations you've never seen, starry sails and keels meant for celestial oceans. In these moments, a quiet awe settles over the ship. You can rest your hand on the warm rail, feel the slow, almost imperceptible rocking of the hull, and for a few hours, the silence feels less like a prison and more like peace. Of course, you can't just sit around contemplating the cosmos. Your muscles, used to hauling and bracing, start to ache from the sheer lack of resistance. So the ship's surgeon prescribes drills slow, deliberate tug-of-war contests against thick coils of rope. It's exhausting work that leaves you drenched, but it keeps the body from forgetting its job. We whisper stories of the old voyages, of Magellan's crew so desperate they ate the leather off the rigging. The tales are terrifying, but they're also a comfort. They remind you that you're part of a long, stubborn line of survivors. Just when you think the patience will hold, it snaps. A fight breaks out over a few drops of lamp oil. Voices get sharp. Before it can turn ugly, the captain signals the drummer. But instead of ordering a lashing, he orders a song. It starts as a low shanty, a melody rising into the void where the wind used to be. One by one, we all join in. As the verses roll on, you can feel the tension bleed out of everyone's shoulders. It's a lesson in leadership. When men are at their breaking point, sometimes music works better than the whip. To keep our minds off the monotony, the crew gets creative. The cook declares a cold feast, whipping up a surprisingly bright meal of salted fish, crumbled biscuits with dried figs, and a pot of rice stained a brilliant gold with a pinch of saffron he'd been hoarding. The captain institutes letters to the future, where we each write a note to be opened at our next port, describing what the stillness taught us. You write about the constellations, about the sound of your own heartbeat, about the simple, profound relief of a shadow. The sealed letters go into a chest, a collective bet that this endless pause will eventually end. And then, one afternoon, it does. It's not a gust, not even a breeze. It's just a flicker on the water's surface, a single dark ripple across the glass. But everyone feels it. A current of pure adrenaline shoots through the ship. The mate's command is a hushed rasp. Stand to the braces. Hearts are pounding, but no one dares to speak above a whisper. A moment later, a puff of air, soft as a ghost's sigh, touches your cheek. The canvas above shivers, then slowly, hesitantly, begins to swell. The São Jerónimo leans into the wind like a long-lost lover. A collective sigh rolls across the deck, a sound so full of relief it could have powered a small windmill. You don't even realize you're crying until you taste the salt on your own lips. Lying in your hammock that night, lulled by the familiar song of water rushing past the hull, you feel an odd sense of gratitude. Not for the heat or the thirst, but for the profound, maddening stillness. It taught you that you can find a wind inside yourself, even when the world has forgotten how to blow. After weeks of nothing but salt spray and sea shanties, the wind finally shoves you towards something new. The hazy contour of a coastline, its low hills dressed in mangroves, its river mouths breathing mist. The lookout's cry, "Land to leeward," snaps through the ship like a taut rope. A jolt of relief runs through the crew, but discipline, that old friend, takes the helm. Sails are trimmed, lead lines are readied. You check your musket, not because you expect trouble, but because the habit is carved as deep as the lines on your hands. You take a deep breath, and the air is a different beast altogether, a heady cocktail of damp earth, wood smoke, and things you can't yet name. After an eternity of open ocean, the smell alone is a feast. The old-time São Jerónimo Times glides into a wide estuary, the captain calling for soundings as if he were asking for a dance partner. Near the rail, the pilot consults a local chart, its edges soft and frayed from countless journeys before this one. "By the deep 12, the leadsman calls out, his voice a steady sing-song chant against the lapping water. Then they appear. Not all at once, but materializing from the mist, canoes so slender they seem to walk on the water. They're paddled by traders, men whose skin gleams with river spray. There's no fear in their approach, just a well-worn caution. Each guide raises an open palm, a universal sign of peace. Our captain returns the gesture before ordering a ladder lowered, a length of bright cloth draped over its side, a clear, wordless invitation. The first few minutes of trade are a masterclass in silent negotiation. The merchants climb aboard, their baskets overflowing with the scent of dried fish, the tang of palm wine, and spices so potent they seem to repaint the air itself. In return, our purser arranges his wares like a jeweler, shimmering bolts of linen, brass rings that catch the sun, and beads sorted into a rainbow of colors. It's a pantomime of want and worth. A smile, a nod, a raised eyebrow. One man, wanting beads for his sister, sketches a woman's silhouette on the deck with a wetted finger, pointing from the beads to his drawing. Another gazes at a polished astrolabe, his oar a language we all understand. There's a quiet respect here. They slip off their sandals before stepping onto our mats. We keep our hands to ourselves, careful not to point. The chaplain hovers nearby, a man of God ready to bless a deal but smart enough to stay out of the way of business. The captain, meanwhile, has his logbook out, referencing old promises made on previous voyages. Fair prices, safe passage, no forced labor. It makes you stand a little straighter, knowing this ship keeps its word. We've all heard the ghost stories of other crews, tales of theft and betrayal that haunt these waters. Sticking to your word, you think, is its own kind of prayer. Once the trust has properly set, an invitation is offered. A few of us are to go ashore. You're chosen. The moment you step into the canoe, the world shifts. The river smells of tannins and blooming flowers, the wood of the canoe polished to a buttery smoothness by 1,000 hands. The paddles dip into the water with a sound like tearing silk. On shore, a bustling market thrives in the shade of palm trees. There are woven mats in dizzying patterns, baskets of cola nuts, and beautiful clay pots the color of the rich earth. A gaggle of children point and giggle at your sun-bleached skin. Then one bravely steps forward, offering you a slice of mango. The juice runs down your wrist, sticky and impossibly sweet. You laugh and thank them with the 2 words Duarte taught you. Under a canopy of palm fronds, the village chief greets the captain. More gifts are exchanged, our bright red cloth for their intricately carved stools, our salt for their honeycomb. The captain doesn't just talk, he listens. He learns of recent storms, of shifting sandbars, of rival ships seen in the distance. The most serious topics are discussed in tones softer than a lullaby. You notice how both men keep their hands in sight, how they leave respectful pauses between sentences. No ink touches parchment here. The agreement is sealed in memory and confirmed over a shared meal. Roasted plantains, fish stewed with okra, and coconut-scented rice. Each bite tells a story. While the officers talk politics, you get a lesson from the locals. A potter shows you how she coaxes a pot from a simple coil of clay, her fingers dancing as she smooths the seams with river water. You try, your own hands feeling like clumsy blocks of wood, and she laughs a warm, genuine laugh. guiding your fingers until the shape holds. Nearby, a drummer is teaching a few sailors a simple beat on a hollowed-out log. You tap along, feeling the rhythm sync up with your own heartbeat. You're not just trading goods, you're trading skills, rhythms, a little piece of who you are. It isn't all smooth sailing. On the second day, a wire gets crossed. A sailor, thinking a ceremonial bracelet is for sale, reaches for it. The owner flinches back, his face a mask of offense. The captain is there in a flash, hands raised in a calming gesture, his voice a low apology. He offers a different gift, a string of fine Venetian beads, and a solemn promise that no sacred items will be touched again. The tension melts as quickly as it formed. The incident becomes a quiet lesson, retold over supper as a reminder to look with your eyes, not your hands. Back on the ship, it feels like a harvest festival. Casks of fresh water are rolled into the hold, alongside bundles of cassava and citrus fruits piled like captured sons. The surgeon is ecstatic, cradling a bundle of medicinal herbs like a newborn. He's already brewing an infusion for the men still shaky from scurvy. Down in the galley, the cook is working magic with okra and smoked fish, and a rich, unfamiliar aroma fills the ship. You eat slowly, savoring a flavor born of a different sun and a different soil. On the evening watch, you notice how the stars look different from land's edge. Fireflies blink along the shore, a constellation of their own, and the faint, steady rhythm of village drums drifts across the water. It's a slow, deep pulse, like the world's own heart. You lean on the rail, the sound mingling with the familiar creak of the ship's rigging, and a strange feeling of kinship settles over you. Two different worlds, separated by an ocean, breathing the same night air. Before we weigh anchor, the chief comes aboard to bless our journey. He dips a palm in river water and touches the mainmast, whispering words that feel powerful even if you don't understand them. Our chaplain answers with a Latin prayer, the two voices weaving together like rope. As a final gift, the captain presents a chest of carpenter's tools. The chief's face breaks into a wide grin. In that moment, you realize that this mutual respect makes the ship's hull feel stronger than iron. As the anchor rises, the shoreline begins to shrink. A few canoes follow us out, the paddlers singing a farewell that ebbs and flows with the waves. We answer with a shanty, our voices rising in a ragged but heartfelt chorus. This journey has given you more than just full barrels and fresh fruit. It's given you the lingering sweetness of mango, the feel of wet clay in your hands, the warmth of a chief's blessing, and the quiet knowledge that even in an age of sharp swords and hungry empires, sometimes the best trade is a simple shared smile. Trouble on a ship never starts with a cannonball. It starts with a grumble about booze. The whisper slithers down the gun deck. The Castilian gunner got a double ration of wine for fixing a cannon, while the Dutch topman who stitched up the rigging got nothing but rope burn and a powerful thirst. In the sweltering heat with bellies half empty, that kind of comparison lands like a lead weight. You can feel it in the air, the sudden stiffening of shoulders, the way chatter dies when an officer strolls by. After weeks of everyone pulling together, this new unease feels like a rogue current trying to crack the hull. The real catalyst, as it often does, came from the kitchen, or what passes for one. During evening muster, the purser, with all the cheer of an undertaker, announced another cut to our biscuit ration. Apparently, some sacks had gone mouldy. A ripple of murmurs turned into a low growl. A Portuguese sailor pointed out that the officers' table never seemed to be short on supplies. A Fleming shot back that the men at the helm needed steady hands, which is why their wine was mostly times water. The words were quiet, but they had barbs. The captain, sensing a potential wildcat strike, dismissed us early, hoping a good night's sleep would cool everyone off. It didn't. The night just filled with hushed, angry meetings by the foremast. I sat with old Duarte and Morau, listening to the younger sailors debate the meaning of fairness. Some wanted to draft a formal petition. Others were ready to refuse morning duties until the rations were sorted. Duarte, a man whose primary life goal is to die of old age and not at the end of a rope, kept his voice low. Go through the bosun, he advised. Not through rebellion. Mutiny makes for terrible shipmates, mostly because they're ghosts. But the idea was out there, smelling of tar and trouble. As I climbed into my hammock, I heard someone nearby humming a battle shanty instead of a sea lullaby. Yeah, sleep wasn't happening. And then morning came, and so did our first revolutionary. A Biscayan sailor flat out refused to holystone the deck. He wasn't scrubbing, he declared, while the officers were munching on fresh fruit from our last stop. When the boatswain ordered him to work, the sailor paused, his hand hovering over the stone, then dropped it with a clack times that echoed louder than a pistol shot. A few guys actually applauded, softly, but it was there. The bosun's jaw clenched so hard I thought he'd crack a tooth. He could have had the man flogged on the spot, but he just stood there, glancing at the quarterdeck where the captain watched, his face a perfect mask. The captain, recognizing his authority was about to go the way of the dodo, called an emergency all hands well, all representatives meeting in his cabin. I got tapped to go as a steady voice, which I think meant I was less likely to start throwing things. There we were, a handful of salty sailors staring at the captain's fancy charts, and cruelly a bowl of citrus fruit saved for emergencies. To his credit, he didn't shout. He laid out the ration ledger, explaining the extra wine was basically a stay-awake bonus for night watch officers, and the fruit was for the sick. But then he said it. Perception matters as much as reality. The meeting went on for hours. Guys aired every grievance they'd been bottling up unfair watches, a recent flogging that felt too harsh, the way everyone was sticking to their own countrymen. The captain just listened. Finally, he offered a deal. A rotating taste panel of common sailors would inspect all rations before they were handed out, and we'd have a nightly forum to air complaints through delegates. Then he promised to share his own citrus ration at the next meal. Transparency, it turns out, is the best way to prevent a keel hauling his. To make it official, the chaplain posted the company policy on the mainmast, highlighting the section on respectful petitioning. It's amazing how seeing a rule that protects you, instead of just punishes you, can unbunch a man's breeches. Of course, you still had the rumor mill churning out tales of a French privateer whose crew simply took over and sailed to Brazil. I countered with my own bedtime story, a little number about Magellan and the mutineers he left to decorate a desolate beach in Patagonia. Fear can be a useful leash. The protest happened anyway. When the reduced rations were issued, a knot of men stood by the mainmast, arms crossed, refusing to move. I stepped in, heart doing a drum solo against my ribs, and reminded them about the new inspection committee. It wasn't a heroic speech, just a, hey, let's at least try the new system before we start sharpening things. The standoff broke not with a bang, but with a collective sigh. That night, we held our first official food-sniffing ceremony. We weighed the biscuits, gave the salt pork a suspicious glare, and confirmed the officer's wine was, in fact, cheap, watery plonk. The whole thing was mostly for show, but seeing it done seemed to drain the poison from the air. The resentment was still there, but it was no longer at a rolling boil. Still, you don't just flip a switch on this stuff. The master-at-arms started checking the weapon locks a little more often, and men ate in tighter national clusters. To break up the cliques, I suggested we all polish the ship's bell together. Nothing says team building like a pointless, shiny chore. Then a squall hit, and Mother Nature provided the ultimate team-building exercise. Suddenly, all hands were on deck, fighting the wind and sea. There I was, on a yardarm next to the Holystone Revolutionary, tying knots as salt spray blinded us. In the middle of the chaos, we caught each other's eye and shared a grin. When you're both about to be blown into the ocean, you tend to forget who got the extra biscuit. After the storm, the captain gathered us all. He read from the log, then added, "This ship does not belong to officers alone. It belongs to all souls aboard." He then passed his bowl of citrus down the line, one slice for every man. Even a sliver of sour fruit can taste like respect. Later, I scratched out a letter home, telling them how for a minute I thought we'd go from a crew to a gang, Then I wrote about the captain and the youngest deckhand, and the way the boy's eyes lit up when he got his slice of fruit. By the end of the week, the Biscayan sailor and the bosun had actually apologized to each other. Duarte just slapped my back and said, "We bent, not broke." He was right. We learned you can ask for more without a riot, and a captain can listen without losing his hat. The ship sailed on, a little wiser, a lot less thirsty for blood, and held together not by nails, but by a conversation. A thin wisp of smoke, delicate as a bookkeeper's signature, draws a line against the pale morning sky. At first you figure it's just a distant squall, but the lookout's second shout spells it out. Sail to windward 2 points off the bow. You'd think there'd be thundering drums and dramatic music, but no. The crew moves with a calm that's been drilled into them for months. The boatswain's whistle chirps in little bursts, calling everyone to their posts. Sure, heartbeats are picking up a private rhythm, but voices stay hushed. No one wants to be the one to startle the ship. Through the haze, you get your first look at the stranger. She's a low-slung thing with sails so patched they look like a beggar's coat, and she's not flying any colors you recognize. Our captain, a master of playing it cool, just orders the times São Jerónimo times to keep her upwind advantage, trimming the sails to stay nimble without looking for a fight. The gunners, meanwhile, are uncovering the demi-culverins, swabbing the barrels with sponges that smell sharply of vinegar and oak. Your job? Fetching powder horns from the magazine, carrying them with all the care of a man delivering a tray of very, very angry eggs. By midday, the other ship finally hoists a flag striped crimson and gold. Fancy, but it doesn't belong to any country you've ever heard of. A privateer, most likely, or just a chancer trying his luck. A new puff of smoke curls from her deck, and she fires what you might call a polite hello, a warning shot that splashes into the sea 100 yards short of our hull. The captain responds with a bit of flag-waving theatre of his own, raising a white flag crossed with the Portuguese armillary sphere. It's a neat way of saying, we can talk, but don't think we're unarmed. The breeze, catching the mood, carries a mix of tar and gunpowder, a scent that's become oddly comforting. A shouting match begins, conducted through big brass speaking trumpets. They claim they have the right to inspect us on the authority of some governor you've never heard of. Our captain asks to see their paperwork. A long silence follows, broken only by the screeching of gulls, who are probably laughing at the both of us. The tension is thick enough to walk on. When the privateer changes course to close the gap, the captain's orders are simple and calm. Hands to quarters. Let's keep courtesy in our hearts and powder dry in our hands. Below decks, it's a flurry of quiet, practical activity. Sailors tie back their hair, secure hammocks, and shift powder kegs. You find yourself helping the surgeon set up his makeshift sickbay, laying out clean linens, checking that the needles and thread are waxed. He gives you a soft smile, as if to remind you he's got fresh thread for whatever new holes you might acquire. The whole affair feels like tidying up the house before particularly messy guests arrive. Back on deck, the gunners have arranged their shot by size, neat as a grocer's apples. As powder runner, you're stationed by the main hatch. The captain waits, letting them get just within hailing distance before trying one last time. When they ignore him, he gives a quiet nod to the master gunner. One shot across the bow, steady and low. Our cannon clears its throat with a cough of smoke and thunder. The ball skims the waves, throwing up a curtain of spray right in front of the other ship. A clear invitation to back off, no postage required. Their reply is a ragged broadside. A few balls thud into the Times São Jerónimo *''s hull near the waterline, sending splinters flying like angry bees. A little lump of, oh bother, forms in your throat. But training is a wonderful thing. You pass powder cartridges to the gun crews, who load, aim, and fire with the steady rhythm of a breathing exercise. With every boom, the ship shudders and exhales, and strangely, so do you. The duel becomes a clumsy sort of dance. We keep our distance, relying on our heavier guns, They dart in, trying to get a clear shot at our stern. The helmsman is a rock, and the captain murmurs headings like a man ordering dinner. You just focus on the powder line, counting breaths between the salvos. The men around you speak in the focused murmur of a library. Ready, run out, fire. Then a shot from our starboard battery finds its mark. A direct hit. Their mainmast splinters like a dropped toothpick, and a cascade of canvas tumbles to their deck. A soft ripple of cheers goes through our crew, not triumphant shouts, just the sound of 200 men exhaling in relief. And just like that, they've had enough of this dance. The enemy vessel limps away, trailing smoke, and hoists a scrap of white cloth. Surrender. The captain orders a ceasefire, and a sudden ringing silence falls, broken only by the hiss of cooling cannon and the slap of waves against the hull. Boarding parties are assembled to go and inspect our former dance partner. Your glamorous role, however, is to stay aboard and help patch the holes. Carpenters are already measuring the wounds in the hull, hammering tar-soaked oakum into the seams. You pass them tools, breathing in the familiar grounding scent of pitch. The surgeon is busy with 2 lightly wounded sailors, murmuring reassurances as he binds their arms. Under his gentle hands, their tense faces finally relax. When the boarding party returns, the story comes out. The privateer was carrying letters of marque from a governor whose authority had expired years ago. They were operating on a license about as current as last year's almanac. Our captain, a man of surprising mercy, decides to confiscate their weapons, give them some fresh water, and send them on their way with a stern warning to steer clear of Portuguese convoys. He notes it all in the ship's log with the dry precision of a man who's seen it all before. As evening falls, we gather for a quiet meal of cassava cakes and spiced fish. The captain offers no grand speeches, just a quiet thanks for being brave without being bloodthirsty. He points out that our restraint is why men on both ships are still alive. The chaplain then leads a brief prayer for the poor sods who just tried to kill us, acknowledging that we all share the same unforgiving sea. It somehow takes the sharp edges off the day. Later, during the starboard watch, you lean against the rail. The privateer has shrunk to a smudge on the horizon, trailing smoke like a sulking child. The sky puts on a show of its own, all fiery embers, as if trying to upstage the afternoon's pyrotechnics. You take a deep breath, letting the cool night air cleanse the salt and smoke from your lungs. The ship's bell chimes, its tone sounding impossibly bright after the day's thunder. Before turning in, you stop by to see the wounded. One of the men, his arm neatly bandaged, thanks you for keeping the powder coming without a flinch. You just smile and place a sprig of dried lavender you keep in your pocket near his hammock to sweeten the air. It's a small gesture, but out here, where cannonballs are a form of conversation, small comforts are everything. You find your own hammock, and as it rocks you gently, the echoes of cannon fire finally fade, replaced by the gentle shushing of the waves. The sea, having had its tantrum, is a cradle once more. The morning after the fight rolls in with a quiet that feels almost suspicious, as if the ocean itself decided to give us a day off. The air hangs thick with the smell of damp rope and fresh tar, the perfume of a job half done. A hazy sun filters through the clouds, lighting up the splintered planks and torn sails like a long, nautical to-do list. You're awake before the bell, pulled from your hammock by the low hum of work already in progress. Carpenters murmur measurements to each other, and sailmakers unfurl massive canvases across the deck, like parents tucking in a very large, very ripped-up child. Putting the pieces back together, you realize, is its own special kind of slow dance. First things first, the hull. You join the carpenter's crew, lugging buckets of oakum and tar. Down by the waterline, the cannonball scars look like nasty purple bruises. The carpenter taps each plank like a doctor checking for broken ribs, listening for the telltale hollow sound of trouble. When he gives a nod, you get to work, stuffing the gaps with sticky oakum and slathering hot tar over the wound until it gleams, black and sealed. It's methodical, messy work. Your hands will smell of pitch for a week, but with every smear, you feel like you're helping the old girl breathe easy again. Up top, the sailmaker is wrestling with the torn topsail. You help pull the heavy canvas taut while he, humming some dreadful off-key sea shanty, stitches patches with a needle that winks in the sun. Every tug of his waxed thread feels like it's pulling the ship's frayed nerves back together. The sailcloth rustles, a papery echo of the waves, a promise that soon it'll be full of wind and purpose once more. Next, the captain orders a full inventory, which means it's time to face the purser. He's the ship's bean counter, and he opens the stores to count every last powder keg, biscuit sack, and bandage, with you as his witness. His ledger turns the chaos of battle into neat little columns: 14 iron shot, 3 pounds of powder, 2 bolts of canvas. When he's done, he thanks you for having steady eyes and shuts the book with a soft times thud asterisk. It's the official sound of a crisis being filed away. Mid-morning, the chaplain gets everyone together for what feels like a group therapy session with a lot more splintering. He has every man touch the rail where the cannons hit. One by one, sailors press their fingers to the scarred wood, muttering quiet thanks for not being turned into chum. It's a surprisingly personal moment. You feel the sun-warmed grain under your palm and find yourself patting the rail like a faithful old dog. Then the chaplain, to his credit, says a prayer for the privateers, too, a quiet reminder that we're not the only ones with families waiting somewhere over the horizon. After the spiritual checkup comes the physical. The surgeon does his rounds, inspecting bandages and mixing up fresh herbal poultices. You get demoted to assistant apothecary, grinding dried lavender and rosemary into a beeswax salve for soothing rope-burned hands. The fragrant smoke wafts through the lower deck, doing a decent job of masking the usual funk of tar and sweat. It becomes a team effort. The uninjured help the injured, and the whole ship feels a little less like a weapon and a little more like a community. The work goes vertical. You clamber up the mainmast to help replace a damaged stay. The climb feels different today, less about adrenaline, more about a simple gratitude for being able to climb at all. From the tops, the sea is a placid sheet of blue, and yesterday's smoke is just a bad memory. You tighten the knots, your calloused fingers doing their work, and look down. The crew moves like ants with a purpose, each one tending to their small, patient task. The sight is strangely calming. At midday, the cook serves up a stew of cassava and salt fish. With a few shavings of citrus peel, he jokes, are worth their weight in gold. A little ripple of laughter, soft but real, spreads from the galley. It's amazing what a hot meal can do for morale. You eat slowly, savoring it, a reminder that healing starts with a warm belly. The afternoon is for paperwork. The captain invites you to his cabin as he writes the official report. His handwriting is impossibly neat as he details the coordinates, the damage, and the necessary repairs. He makes a special note of the crew's bravery and the mercy shown to the enemy. Compassion, he murmurs, almost to himself, is also cargo. You file that phrase away. It feels heavier than any cannonball. Later, he calls for a post-mortem on the quarterdeck. Sailors from each watch share what they learned. The powder monkeys want better safety markers. The topmen suggest stashing spare rope closer to the foremast. The captain listens to it all, nodding, weaving their hard-won wisdom into the ship's new rules. You timidly suggest placing lavender bundles near the sickbay to calm the wounded. He gives you a small, genuine smile and agrees. Turns out, practical fixes and gentle comforts are equally welcome aboard. As the sun dips low, we start polishing the memories away. Instead of scrubbing grime, we polish the deck around the repaired cannon pits. Duarte, one of the old salts, tells stories as you work cautionary tales of ships that didn't patch themselves up in time. By dusk, the deck is gleaming, the scars softened into the wood story, and the mood is finally settled. For the evening watch, the captain reads the names of those who stood out, from the carpenters to the cook. It's brief, but it lands. He finishes by reminding us that the ocean is always ready to test you again. Storms and foes will return, but if we stay sharp, so will quiet dawns like this one. Night finally wraps the ship in a cool, salty silence. You take a slow walk on deck, lantern swinging, checking the lines. The mended sails breathe softly in the new breeze. Above, the stars are flung across the blackness like a careless handful of flour. You lean against the bow, watching the phosphorescence glitter in the wake, feeling the ship cut through the water with a newfound ease. The bruises, on both the wood and the crew, are still there, but they've been tended to. Before crawling into your hammock, you scratch a few words onto your wax tablet. Mending things. It seems to cover the ship, the crew, and maybe even you. The rosemary sprig by your pillow still smells faintly of the surgeon's salve. You breathe it in, listening to the creak of well-mended timbers and the soft sigh of the ocean, and realize you can rebuild peace, one plank, one stitch, one shared meal at a time. Sleep comes easy. You know you're getting close when the gulls show up. For weeks, the São Jerónimo has been pushing north, her sails fat with winds that feel like old friends. Then one day, the air has a different bite to it, and the night breeze carries the ghost of pine trees and wood smoke. You can mark the changing latitude in the logbook with all the neat lines you want, but the real proof is in the little things. That faint, hopeful glow on the horizon long after sunset. And the way the men's talk suddenly shifts from old grievances to plans for a proper drink on shore. A restless energy thrums through the ship, a hum that has nothing to do with the wind in the rigging. The rhythm of the ship softens, settles. With the last of the repairs done and the storerooms restocked, there's a sense of winding down. You find yourself polishing the same brass fittings on morning watch until they throw back a perfect, distorted reflection of the sky. In the curve of the metal, you catch a glimpse of your own face darker, etched with salt, a decade older than the boy who signed on. You and Morau talk quietly about what comes next. He's squirreling away every coin to buy a fishing boat of his own. You think about teaching kids the star charts, maybe without the threat of a sudden squall to focus their minds. It's a nice thought, a friendly current pulling you along. The captain declares it's time for letters. Last chance to get your thoughts down before the chaos of landfall. You find a spot near the foremast, wax tablet on your knees, and try to bottle the voyage in words. How do you describe the permanent smell of tar, the surprising comfort of a cassava stew, the unnerving silence of the doldrums, or the deafening bark of a cannon? You write about the friendships that stick and the bruises that fade, and about the sprig of rosemary you've kept, now so dry it barely smells of Lisbon's market. You finish with a simple promise: I return changed, but I return. It feels less like a sentence and more like a bridge you've just built across an ocean. Midweek, the chaplain holds a service for the ones who didn't make it back from this voyage, or any other. He reads their names from a worn-out list, men taken by storms, fever, or the wrong end of a fight. You bow your head and say a silent prayer for them, and even for the privateer crew you fought, and then let go. It feels like home just got a little bigger, making room for not just your own ghosts, but a few of theirs too. As we cross into home waters, the navigator starts letting the younger lads take turns with the sextant. You find yourself guiding a boy's clumsy hands, showing him how to trap the sun against the horizon, talking him through the count as the sand glass whispers empty. There's a strange calm in teaching. You realize all the hardship, the fear, the sheer boredom of the voyage has settled into something solid inside you. It's turned into knowledge you can actually pass on. How to read a storm in the clouds, how to coax a breeze from a dead calm, how to hear the grumblings of mutiny before they become a roar. It's ballast, you think, the kind that will keep their future journeys steady. Landfall is a rumor, then a certainty, arriving with the dawn. A pink blush spreads over the mouth of the Tagus, and across the water, the faint sound of chapel bells drifts out to meet us. There's a sudden, frantic grace to the work, sails furled with care, lines coiled perfectly, uniforms brushed down. You lean against the rail, a ridiculous lump forming in your throat as the city sharpens into view. The jumble of rooftops, the spires of the cathedral, the bright white arcades of Rua Nova. Then the smell hits you, the smell of land, rich earth, horses, and baking bread, and it wraps around you like a blanket you'd forgotten you missed. From the quayside, men wave, and the ship's trumpet gives a low, grateful bellow in reply. Getting off the ship is its own slow ceremony. The captain reads the final entry in the log, his voice steady as he thanks us for our loyalty. The purser sets up a small table, handing out wages with a handshake for every man. You fold your coins into a cloth purse, the weight of it both a relief and a responsibility. The brittle sprig of rosemary goes in right alongside them, proof, maybe, that you never really left home behind. Before the chaos, a few of you gather for a quiet farewell on deck. Small gifts are exchanged, a spare needle, a bit of carved bone, tiny things that just mean, I remember you. Duarte shoves a chip of holystone into your palm with a grin. So you don't forget how to scrub a deck properly, he jokes. Morale gives you a saltary string for his wife's loom. The captain gives each of us a blessing and gets one back in return, a muttered promise to sail with him again, if the chance comes. On the quay, families are clustered together, a sea of shawls and anxious faces. You spot your sibling by the warehouse, a flash of a waving kerchief, and then you're wrapped in an embrace so fierce it almost knocks you over. It smells of soap and flour, the cleanest scent in the world. You tell them about the voyage in broad, gentle strokes, leaving out the parts that would only make them worry, focusing on the good wins and the shared jokes. When they ask what you learned out there, you just say, that kindness holds a ship together just as much as the timber. Days later, sleeping in a bed that stubbornly refuses to rock, you still feel the ghost of the ocean's cradle. Your dreams are a jumble of memories, the dead quiet of the doldrums, the sharp, life-saving sting of citrus on a dry tongue, the eerie blue dance of street Elmo's fire on the mast. You wake up with the captain's voice in your ear, asterisk, compassion is cargo, asterisk, and a profound sense of gratitude. The sea, you realize, has left a tide in your chest that will never quite go out. The first weeks are a blur of markets, stories, and final trips to the Casa de India. An official with ink-stained fingers records the voyage's profits, and you see your name in a long list in a heavy ledger. It's just a single line of script, a name that can't possibly tell the story of the watches, the storms, the songs. Still, seeing it there feels like quiet applause. You sign for your remaining pay and drop a coin in the donation box for the sailors' hospital. A small thank you for a safe return. Most evenings, you end up back at the harbor. You watch new crews making their ships ready, and you can hear the cocktail of nerves and excitement in their loud shouts. Sometimes you'll offer a piece of advice to a young sailor who looks lost. Keep rosemary in your bunk, always share your fruit, learn every man's name. Other times you just nod. Every sailor has to find their own stories. The sea is always there, a low hum you can't quite tune out. One night, standing on the breakwater, you find yourself talking to the São Jerónimo herself, now empty and quiet at her mooring. It's not out loud, just a silent thank you for the ship that carried you through it all, a promise to come back when the time is right. For now, though, home is calling, and the only voyage that matters is the one into a deep, dreamless sleep.